experience helping leaders, managers, and other professionals grow and succeed, especially in global and cross-cultural environments. He has worked in public service and with major companies like PepsiCo, Motorola, Applied Materials, etc. Before moving into full-time consulting and research, he also taught at local institutions and UK Open University. His work focuses on leadership, behavior, and personal development. His doctoral research looked at leadership and perception biases, and he's also a certified coach and practitioner in applied neuroscience and mental health. So today, he'll be sharing how a DBA can support executives in becoming more effective and successful. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Janath. Over to you, Doctor.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Nair. By the way, good evening to everybody. I'm calling from Singapore, and I'm not able to see the audience. Do I have any idea who the audience are?
No, we'll be getting like the audience will not be, you'll not be able to see the audience, like the participant sections, they'll be there, and their queries and everything, they'll be posting it in the Q&A session, and at the end we'll address those questions.
Okay. So that means at this moment in time, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a monologue, and we will exchange our thoughts and ideas after my presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a very quick introduction for myself, and thank you to Dr. Nair for the short intro that was given to for this. Now, for me, my journey has been quite interesting, really, and in order for me to help to explain to you why this particular program helped me tremendously professionally and also personally for a few reasons, and a little bit of background would be good to kind of set the stage. Okay, firstly, there has always been a question of what is why did I do a doctoral program rather than a PhD? And during my journey, I was actually asked, if I wanted to do a PhD. Unfortunately, for me, I felt that I still want to be very much in the practice area. And in my mind, there's always a challenge of whether I should be called an academic practitioner or a practicing academic. Right? And that is, as a corporate citizen, before I actually gave up 15 years ago to go into a private practice, people do see very differently as to whether you have your placement is very much in academia or really in the area or in the professional practice. Okay, so with that in mind, I felt that the doctoral program benefits me much more because it helps me to perhaps answer a lot of questions of why from the what that I experienced in the corporate world. And as a result of that, it also provides me the different perspectives. I would call it like looking at different parts of the elephant. Okay. The knowing part, is one aspect of it. The doing part is another. And really, from understanding, if I were to use a very typical way of how I actually built on a developmental process, with my clients, everything starts with knowledge. Now, only then can you proceed towards understanding and onto the relevance, and with that you can then apply, and eventually, being more competent, you actually synthesize. So that is I would consider as different levels of appreciation of development, right? From being able to understand to being able to competently synthesize your own solutions. Now, uniquely for me, where I come from, and being a Singaporean Asian, Now, my education has been very much a European system. And most part of my life, or at least corporate life, I work in an American MNC. So would I consider myself as having the best of three worlds? Perhaps yes. Now, how do I see, this synergy here? Because it, each of these exposure, right, provides very different education for me. Right? From an Asian perspective, as an ethnic Asian, it's very much about behavior, it's about values. Education itself provides me the understanding, right? And the professional journey provides me the experience and the practice. So when I put the three together, that's how my professional DNA was built. How do I actually apply, and what really led me to this, the DBA, personal and both professionals? One is, of course, aspirational. And one thing is, I always tell my kids, I actually deliver to my promise to them and to myself. My way of motivating them, to continue to in their educational journey, and I'm glad that they are doing very well now. Instead, I study with them, so this is my way of showing the way, and actually, promising them that before I start to or begin to hang up my boots, quite simply is I would have completed my postgraduate. Right? Then, of course, for me, I have a very curious mind because in many instances I ask lots of whys. Personal aspect and even professional things seems to be quite simplistically explained. They say, oh, that's how it happens. Very often, even in the corporate world, since many of you would be working professionals, will also appreciate the fact that we don't really get real answers behind the many things and how we actually do things. So that to me is a way of finding answers for myself. Now, professionally, which I will share a little bit more about what I have experienced. And it actually pushed me to do a lot of validation. I will be sharing with you my research very quickly. Now, the emphasis is not going through the whole mundane, the whole academic or the full 9 years about the research itself, but really to bring it out in essence the understanding, the discovery that I had, and that which helped me to validate many things that happen in the organization that I have the privilege to experience, both as an internal consultant, i.e. being a part of a corporate, and also as an external consultant. Right? So it's a way of helping me to validate the real world. At the same time, what they say, right, the power of understanding, knowledge is power. And especially for us working professionals, being an authority voice, or the voice of authority, it's very important that we back up what we say. Not just about, hey, I've been there, I've done that. That is not good enough. Additionally, if we can explain, what it is and why it is, it makes us more credible. And I put it as a professional credibility, being able to stand the ground and share and help people to understand what it is all about. As I mentioned just now about learning more about the elephant, often it's not just what is it, it's about what it should be, because when it comes to synthesizing, the aha moment is not where you understand. The aha moment actually is, so what can you do about it, moving forward? And that makes it even more powerful as a practitioner, practicing psychology here. Right? Of course, at the last bullet, you say, I told you so. No, that's not a way of trivializing, somebody. Right? It's about being able to say, hey, we come to understanding, we learn something. right? And we can learn together. So let me just continue here. Now, the research and to set the context of my research, I actually witnessed a few things. Now, what my research is about is understanding the perception or perception bias, okay, on leadership attributes in multinational companies. Now, when I say MNCs, it does not necessarily uh, mean, just Western. By virtue of this research, somehow or another, uh, incidentally, I actually included, the MNCs of the three regions, which is Asian MNCs, American MNCs, and Western MNCs. Right? And I explain a little bit more why that came to about, although my initial emphasis was towards more of the Western MNCs. Okay. Now, I have actually observed a few very interesting phenomena or behaviors in the social context. Now, I'm very much a human social professional. Being in the HR practice for the last, I would probably say that it's kind of lost count, maybe probably about 34 years of human social, experiences. Like I delve a lot in the fundamental of social psychology, social behaviors, and also tempered in the neurosciences. And some of these things are actually out of curiosity than, for the purpose of the profession. Now, what has happened in my personal experience or professional experience, it shows that there are some unique social manifestations, okay, that somehow or another seems to draw along ethnic lines. And as a result of that, Western executives comparative to Asian executives tends to be seen in a more favorable light. Okay. Secondly, a number of HR practices that which many of you would have encountered in large organizations do have explicit and even implicit discriminatory influences here, right? In opportunities, in assessments, and the way we compensate them, it happened, right? And I'm not going to sweep things under the carpet and just put forth, what is happening up there, the realities. Right? And coming to our side of the challenge down here, I've actually observed that many Asian executives, and especially those who work in the multinational corporations, tend to exhibit what we call this minority modern. Western executives displayed privilege or even superiority behaviors here. If you have any question on this, just hang on. I think we'll be able to better understand where I'm coming from as I go into that research. Now, what I found was that in many instances, okay, and based on the research findings, one major challenge actually comes out from one's self-concept, because I dealt primarily in the behavioral dimension, right? The feeling and the thinking, okay, has very, very strong impact on how we behave. And at the end of the day is the self-esteem that we have, or how do we see ourselves or self-concept. So mindsets exposing very subordinating behaviors, especially in the part of Asian executives. Now, do bear in mind that the research is not a dichotomy between the Western or Asian culture. It's not. It's never intended to be in that to carry the kind of reference. No, it's just purely looking at an organization per se and how the mergers of cultures and values and some of these perceptions kind of when put together, what actually happens. Okay, and I also realized that in my coaching interventions, a lot of work has to be put into reframing the executives mentally in order for them to begin, this self-initiation of recovery, of deciding, and willing to do things differently and overcoming self-limiting thoughts and behaviors that seriously compromise on their mindsets, right? And as a result, their behaviors within the organization. At the end of the day, truth begets is all this do impact on the careers, okay, of the executives. Now, this is the research, and pretty much I would, if I were to read it here, okay, intellectual investigation of perception bias and attributes. As I mentioned just now, is to validate the contextual challenges in Asia. Now, why I put it Asia is many of this research talking about social discrimination, perception biases, implicit, explicit, leadership categorization, and all the good stuff, all the good theoretical stuff, right? The majority of the research are done or were done in Western countries with the Western context as the background of their research. My research was uniquely more Asian, conducted within the Asia context, and the backdrop is primarily that of a Asian population, right? Even within Asian population, MNCs within a Western population. So it is not a Western dominant environment; it's actually an Asian dominant environment. And I want to understand if the same form of manifestation of behaviors and biases do happen here, which is very apparent that it actually happened elsewhere in other parts of the globe. So this is the title of my research. Now, as I mentioned just now, I will go quickly more into the findings and also the implications coming out of that. Other theoretical stuff is I will just leave it behind. All right, if you do have any questions, you're more interested, we can have a separate conversation. Now, the research highlights several key observations. One, Westerners are placed. There is actually a preference for Western leaders. Okay? And in definition, Westerners here are defined as those of European descent, okay, whether it is European or American. So they are classified under the category of Westerners. Okay. Now, there is a preference for Westerners to place in leadership roles. Okay, and Asians tend to assume team members' role. Two, the support for Asians to fill these leadership positions suggests they having to display similar attributes, that means behaviors, of Western leaders that the organizations are actually looking for. So it's almost, there's a slogan that we say, right? When in Rome, do what the Romans do. And the fact that if an Asian executive working in a Western organization, the expected behavior associates towards a Western bias or Western prototype style of leadership behaviors, which they would then find it more acceptable. Thirdly, right, Westerners are actually perceived to be generally more successful compared to Asian executives. Seems shocking, yet the reality hits very, very hard here. How do I actually conduct this? I just showed you my reflection first. There is really a need to understand the social dynamics within organizations and also how one plays into the organization as an Asian leader in order to be able to mitigate the existing I wouldn't use the word discrimination. I say bias, whether it is real or implicit. Right. The Asian leaders must navigate some of this uh, position of lesser favor. And as a result, the Asian leaders have to step up in order to be able to be at the level of what, you know, the Western organization expect you. And primarily, it is in the area of behaviors. Because the truth is this, many instances where, again, this is just very descriptive, and no offense, neither am I being discriminating about it. Okay, we always tend to say that Asians, we work very, very hard. We work 16-hour days, and we are highly competent. Why is it somehow or another that in many instances, this very hardworking, very competent Asian executive got bypassed? So there's always that hanging, that bug there that we carry, or I personally carry professionally. Yeah. Okay. Now, to understand that performance is actually given. Right? The fact that you don't even perform and you're not competent, don't even think about what's next. Right? So the objective, as I mentioned just now, okay, to understand the ethnic influence. Why this ethnic influence down here? My proposition was this: if a Western executive sees Asian executives in a certain light, do Asian executives see ourselves the same way? It's almost like, if I put it in a very simple term, if someone says that, I'm no good, right? That is perhaps, could be my problem or the other person's problem. On the other hand, if I see myself as no good, it actually validates the other person telling me that I'm no good. So if a Western executive sees an Asian executive as not good enough, do we actually see ourselves that the same way and actually validate, their assessment of us? Okay. Two is this: there are actually a lot of external influences, especially at this time, in the 21st century, we're talking about the borderless world, the impact of globalization, social changes, multicultural, ethnicity, okay, multinational workplace dynamics. Okay. Is there a new prototype of leadership required? We call it global executive rather than national executives. And thirdly, it's, from that itself, I asked the question: then how can we help Asian leaders compete better on the global platform here? Okay. Now, relating to this research, some of this conceptual framework, some of the research done, I'm going to go through very fast here, right? As I mentioned just now, not intent to dwell on the theoretical aspect, but rather than the more pragmatic perspective. Right? Research about modern minorities. That's to say that Asian employees tend to reconcile themselves being second class in that way. Okay, I'm not able to be in the leadership position. Never mind, I will cut and to show them that I'm competent at the next level, next level. Okay. Again, simply put, it's like the best second class citizen. Two, there's this. We've heard about the glass ceiling, stuff like that. There's this bamboo ceiling. This particular term was coined by this lady called Hugh. Bamboo ceiling, bamboo representing Asian, whereby there is a ceiling Asians play in a Western, within a Western context, or even in a multinational context. Okay. Thirdly, right, There are a lot of stereotyping happening within organization. And in many instances, okay, a pro-Western or Western majority culture that pre-exists, okay, that has been imposing on the value system for the longest time. And taking, for example, Asian has gone through a long journey of colonization, right? The colonial syndrome is still quite prevalent in many parts of Asia. And what that means is that somehow or another we still there are instances of behaviors that suggest we play, the role of being the colonized, not the colonizer. And I will explain to you some of those experiences that I had to suggest some of these behaviors. Okay? Now, thirdly, the main research that suggests that Western form of leadership seems to be a little more superior than Asian form of leadership. Now, my advocacy is that there is perhaps an Asian form of leadership, but it's just that it's so segmented. It's so distinctly diverse because Asia is not Asia as a homogeneous entity, right? It is so multifaceted. Yet there are exhibitions of Asian style leadership, which somehow is not seen as a dominant form of leadership philosophy.
Sorry to interrupt, Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a request from the participant side that they are they are not able to hear you properly.
Oh, okay.
Can you please be a little more louder or keep the mic near? So I think it will be easy for them to hear.
Okay, how do I sound now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, I'm putting the mic closer to my lips. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now, there is the other related research here, as I mentioned, leadership prototypes are post-colonial mentality, right? And also some of you who are or have worked in multinational organization, you will see certain form again, behaviors exhibited in parent parent country national. Okay? Now that means MNC that are domiciled in a particular Asian country, right? And there are many, right? And they actually prefer the executive to be parachuted into the host country rather than picking the talents in that local in that location where they reside. And there's the syndrome called the Pinkerton syndrome that is uniquely Singapore that is being coined here. And it actually suggests that I would probably say this Singapore woman, right? Because this is actually a local phenomenon. Prefer Westerners as life partner. So if in your mind now you think what happened to the guys, I will tell you a separate story about that. Okay, now there are many concepts down here. Ethnicity stereotyping in your DBA that you are participating in. You will be challenged to bring in as many conceptual framework to help you to build your case. Right? All in all, for myself, I have close to 16 or 16. Let me put it. Yeah, I did have 16 social psychological concepts that I have to play around, and each of them has its own impact on my research. Some other my the advice was this is just too expensive, and along the way I would have got lost. And it's true because the demand of the few of the 16 different concepts in one particular doctoral research is just way too much. eventually I reduced it and narrowed it down to 4 key concepts here. A concept on the theory on ethnicity, stereotyping, talking about social discrimination, a very simple explanation. Ethnicity and leadership, all this leadership prototyping, expectant leadership behavior, categorization, and how ethnicity is linked to positions of leadership. Right? In the psychological, social psychology aspect, the I call it how you assess behavior towards perception towards leaders, okay, from a social dynamic perspective. Implicit, explicit biases, okay, things like if something probably more familiar from the grouping, how would they collectively think about us as a social and as an Asian entity. So there is very much something to the effect of we and they kind of an issue within a MNC environment. Right. Now, the other one, of course, I mentioned earlier, globalization, the power theories, how all this play into this borderless world, right? And very much happening in Asia because we are the confluence of trade Asia. Now, I'm going to go into my research now. Before that, let me just give you a little bit of the construct of my research. I actually have to draw out a vignette. Okay, this vignette means, I actually put out a scenario to describe a particular situation, an organization situation, and this is very resemblant of a typical organization. Okay, what this vignette shows is an organization team that has 4 positions. And these 4 positions are being manned by individuals. Right? There are 2 managerial positions and 2 team member positions. Now, in this but questionnaire here, this is what my research was based on, and it's actually an interview. The 4 individuals, the names were given. Okay, 2 were of Asian names, and 2 were of Western names, and 1 individual having no name. So 5 names given to the respondents. And I actually asked them to fill the positions with the names given. So do remember, 2 names are Western sounding. For example, James, that's a Western sounding name, right? And 2 of Asian name. 1 is, for example, it's called Yin Men. It's a typical Asian Chinese name, right? Okay. So with that, I asked them to put the names into the 4 positions. The 4 positions I mentioned again, 2 managers, 1 mid-level, 1 high-level, and 2 positions are just team member roles. Okay, now, this is what came out from the research. Right. Firstly, I actually had 16 MNCs involved, okay, and total of 20 respondents. As part of research, quick explanation, why only 20? That is the thing about data saturation. That's the thing about part of guidance from for a qualitative research. Yeah. Now, initially, what happens was that I targeted only 2 MNCs, and in fact, I went to them and invited them and asked them, and they were both my clients, and asked them if they would be interested to partake in the research with me, because they had a good proportion of Asian employees within the organization. The initial interest was very, very high. The endorsement was given. Now, when the corporate parent company responded in support of the research that conducted here in Asia, and both of them were actually American companies. Okay. They set out a few expectations. One is that during the conduct of my research, my interviews with the respondents in the company, they wanted the HR representative to be in during the interview. Secondly, they actually say that I'm not supposed to present my data until it's been vetted by the company. So we had expectation. I totally rejected, this whole collaboration because it completely breaks the confidentiality requirement of the research. So it does such things, and for me, it did happen. And I was actually taken by surprise because coming from the HR organization, they would have known better. My question was why their anxiety or their concern when this is a research that would eventually benefit them to better appreciate perhaps the challenges that they face within their own company. Okay, and even if for my report and in my written thesis, the company's name would not have been mentioned in any case. The anonymous nature of this research, the confidentiality of this research should be maintained. So I actually had to turn it down, and eventually, with the help of the university, reaching out to the existing postgraduate students they had. These are all they were all working professionals in the mid-level to high senior level executive positions. They actually accepted my invitation. So as a result of that, I had 16 representations of different MNCs across the globe. And as a result for this one also, two Asian respondents from Asian MNCs were involved. So it was more a coincidence rather than a planned research that we involved. And it was good because it gave me an opportunity to see if there was any distinctive difference between Asian MNCs compared to Western MNCs. Okay. And let me move on here. Now, you see down here, there's like a number of respondents, okay, mostly from American MNCs. Okay, a number of NMCs involved there. Now, I have to say that now all the respondents were of Asian descent, of Asian ethnicity. Okay, that comes from different part of Asia, residing in Singapore. I have respondents locally from Singapore, from China, from India, okay, from Indonesia, from Philippines, and I have actually Asian Australian, Asian American. So it's kind of a nice it's a nice mixed bag of respondents. Now, what I've learned from the data analysis, let me just go through a little bit slower here. If you see the left column, talking about the number of respondents selecting a Western name, that means David James or John Mayer for the position of leaders. Position LH is the leader higher position. Position LM is the leader of the middle level position. Okay, and executive EA, executive A, and executive B. You realize from the numbers that actually 19 of the 20 respondents actually chose a Western name for position LH, and 13 of them chose a Western name for position LM. So majority is skewed towards having Western names placed on those leaders' position. And look at the executive positions here. 1 is 0, the EA is 0, and EB, there's 4. You look at the second row, number of respondents, of course, relating to the numbers on the first row itself. Numbers selecting Asian names. The two names are Yingming and Mohan for the position. Nobody chose an Asian name for the leader H. Only 4 chose leader and position. 20 of them actually chose an Asian name for executive A and 15 of them for executive B. So for Asian names, they were skewed towards the executive position, not the leadership position. Now, what happened to the leftovers, right? The number of responses selecting person with no name. Okay, you see the word 1, the number 1. Okay. One of the respondents chose a no name for leader position H. Now, the comments added for his choice is that this person is probably a Westerner or New Zealander. I'm not sure why he said that, or the person said that. Now, simply is that, there is a suggestion that this person, is most probably a Westerner. So it's really skewed again towards, a Westerner being in that position. Okay? Now, 3 chose, right, no name in the position of LM. And actually, one of them inferred that this person probably has a Western education. Again, it suggests a certain alignment towards something that has a Western influence. So in order for that person to be in that position of leadership. Again, 0 for EA, and 1 is put on EB. And comment, of course, mentioned by here is that it has to be, it's most probably an Asian Chinese. Okay. Now, those comments are written here in verbatim. There was no amendment or alteration to the comments made. It's directly from the input or their responses to further questions as to why they make those choices. Okay. The graph will be able to show you a better picture. You see the blue, right? Majority suggests the Western names to be put in the leadership position. Majority placed Asian names in the executive position. Was I surprised as a researcher when I found, when I got the data or during that conversation interview with them, I was actually surprised because I would have thought that the fact that they were all Asian executives, they would have perhaps put forth their explanation or justification of why, how Asian should be and believed could be up there. So there is already a presupposition down here, as a researcher. Now, of course, that's dangerous. Yes, do be careful. We supposedly, need to go into research from a very non-partisan position. Now, nonetheless, it just aroused my curiosity that even for this Asian executive, they themselves actually bought into the fact that the leadership position majority are being met, should be met by Western leaders. Interesting. And executive position should be played by Asian because we are good at it. Like typically a minority role modeling syndrome here. Now, the next question that I actually asked them, the next aspect of the research I asked them is about potential for leadership. Now, what I've done is in the vignette itself, I gave a description of the executive, right? Yin for example, how Yin typically behave. I would say typically, it's not a generalization. Okay, typically behave being someone, okay, an Asian Chinese perhaps, or be more conservative, hardworking, put your foot down or the feet down, dig your head in, work very hard, okay, and hope to gain the appreciation, from all the intelligent and good work, okay, and not asking for recognition. That's the kind of that typical Asian value that, we are humble, okay, we work hard because, we should be working hard, right? Okay, now, the other description of Mohan is one that's a little more someone who is more outspoken, who is able to step up, being able to challenge the status, being more aggressive, more ambitious, putting himself in front, more visibility. Right? So with that description of behavior, right, and I asked the question, asked of the respondent. So which one do you think, would be in favor of supporting that this person has a greater potential for leadership? Okay? So that description that is for the EA that suggests someone who's more conservative. The respondent actually read that these are behaviors that suggest that, that or that do not promote, leadership. Okay, those behaviors exhibited by EB to be more outspoken, more right in the front, and more ambitious, and those are behaviors, okay, that suggest leadership, complete leadership potential. Now, I actually use the framework of this global leadership attributes that has certain categorization. Okay, and this categorization lists out a bunch of attributes of behaviors that suggest that these are more Western dominant form of behaviors, and a list of behaviors that actually suggest Asian form of behaviors. And it actually match into this leadership categorization of what the Westerners expect and what Asians expect. So EB's behavior or attributes suggest something that's closer to what the Western organization expect as potential for leadership. Do bear in mind that these were feedback given by Asian respondents. So they, in a way, actually align, right, to more towards Western leadership concept, Western leadership behavior, than any form of Asian leadership. Yeah. Now, you look at third row, of course, there were a few mixed back. About, here and there, and they gave certain reasons to say that, hey, we do have our own good points, our potential, and it cannot be just by virtue of a list of attributes. Again, now, right? Of course, from a research standpoint, we just look at what are the dominant data suggests, where the implications are skewed towards, or the preference are skewed towards. So, as the chart shows, here, I will not go through. It's just a representation of just what I mentioned. For EA position, no, majority feels that it's not in favor. Has low potential. EB has higher potential of leadership. Now, here. The third question that I should ask them is, which leader is better at exhibiting successful behaviors? A Western or an Asian leader? You look at the numbers. 17 out of 20 actually suggested that a Western leader is perceived, okay, is perceived to better exhibit successful behaviors compared to an Asian executive, right? And the three of them actually, and only 3 out of 20 remain neutral. So again, just from the chart itself, there is a preference towards, or they, I will not say preference, they are already perceived to be successful, right? If you were to put two executive Asian, and a Western executive, there's already a bias towards the executive from the West, even without anything else to substantiate the competence or the abilities of the two individuals. My key findings here, very, very quickly. One is that the choice of leadership. There is a preference of Western leaders. And where Asian members assume the team roles. So is that doomsday for Asian executive? Of course, that's certainly not the case. There are opportunities. Secondly, ethnic perception of leadership. Interesting that Westerners see themselves as more superior compared to the Asians. Now, then it is aggravated now, or a more serious issue, where Asians also agree that the Westerners are seen to be of a better standing here, being more successful, being better, everything to be better in performance and abilities. And thirdly is this. It actually showed that the Western style behaviors are considered more appropriate and more acceptable, not just by the Western executive, even by the Asian executives. And so that suggests that we tend to exhibit very stereotypical attributes, that do not promote or do not tell ourselves as being able or being competent enough to be in leadership position. So is that a double whammy here? And now from this group of respondents who are Asian executives, we do not see well of ourselves. Right? Let me go through here. The Western leadership in MNCs. So as I mentioned, there's a Western view of leadership. It is more preferred and is being seen as more effective. Right? Two, these are suggested to be, they call it the expectant behaviors, right? And there was no indication to suggest that, at least from the respondents, suggest that we are equal or can be even more superior as Asians in the same context. My takeaway is this: as a working professional, now that research itself did very much validate many of the experiences that I have observed in my professional life. I've seen colleagues, right, being bypassed for promotion purely from the fact that they are of different ethnicity, disregarding the outstanding performance of the Asian associate. Now, I've actually also experienced, or at least witnessed, a very detrimental behaviors of Asian executives who are not willing to step up, to acknowledge the realities of working in a multinational organization, and yet stick to their certain values that very much been, our way of Asian education right, suggest certain form of behaviors that are not necessarily very supportive or that promotes, help the Asian executive to grow in Western organization. I give a very simple example down here. Okay, and this anecdote, a real incident. I have a senior manager in my Malaysia manufacturing plant, and when I visited him, he brought me to his office and he showed me, a whole panel, 6 panels in his office, and he proudly shared with me, say, Jonathan, you see what I'm doing here? I'm able to run the whole manufacturing line just sitting in my office. I said, wow, I'm impressed just by looking at the 6 screen. Okay, he can control the whole manufacturing flow and making sure that everything runs well. Okay? So let me call him Lau, right, Mr. Lau, right? I said, Lau, that's very impressive. No? And he says, I've been doing this for the last 10 years. So what he was suggesting is that, I've been doing such a good job being able to run an impeccable, manufacturing line down here. I should be recognized. After 10 years, I should be, in the next high position, probably, right? So that was what he was trying to suggest. And I asked him a question. I say, Lau, does your supervisor in the US or even your local site supervisor know about it? And he looked at me and he says, well, they should know. They should know. So my response to him was this: now, what do you mean that they should know? See, did you tell them, what you have done? And his response to that was this: "Hey, John, are you trying to ask me to blow my horns? Am I supposed to be boasting, and telling them all this?" So in response to that, I say, "Lau, okay, I'm not asking you to blow your horns. Okay? I'm asking you to state the fact of what you have done, how competent you have been, and how you have been driving the performance on the manufacturing line. There's nothing more that you need to, because you have done well." Okay? He got back and said, "Hey, I'm supposed to be humble." So can you imagine that? Humility is a good value that we have. On the other hand, if it's misconstrued, it compromises us. And I asked him, I said, Lau, if you do not showcase yourself, as what would, another executive would have done? Your supervisor would not know how well you have done in your job. You won't get the recognition. And I can bet you in the next 5 years, you will still be doing the same thing that you are doing now. So the challenge of we being very much in our own shell, like we do not know the rules of the game, right? We within an American MNC that you need to showcase yourself, you need to step up, you need to be more, a typical Western manager, right? Speak your mind so that people begin to notice you in the right way, not going beyond things, our DNA, right? The education we have, not betraying our own Asian values, not having to go beyond that, nonetheless doing what's right still. We actually do compromise ourselves. Okay? So this study validated what I have been, concerned about, and with this, it further helped me to reaffirm, and when I get out there, I can share even more that even what I saw, I've proven it in my research. Asian professionals are being perceived negatively, not because we are negative or negative. No, it's just because of the stereotypical lens we are perceived negatively or not as good as. Right? Secondly, is this, and it is scary, that Asian leaders are themselves advocates of Western leadership. Is it wrong? Not necessarily. On the other hand, is that are you so into already in total the Western leadership style, okay, or prototype? What about those attributes that we have seen for ourselves, the successes in many Asian countries? We have our own value system that suggests certain form of leadership behaviors. Right? For example, role modeling. We are very, very strong, but in showing rather in telling. While in many instances, many of you would have agreed, Western corporations tend to do a lot of telling rather than showing. Right? Now, one thing that has been a lingering pain for many Asian countries is the very unhealthy political past. And I'm first to admit that even Singapore, right, as much as the progress has suggested how we have moved forward, okay, we are still carrying the baggage of this colonialism, right? Post-colonialism syndrome, okay, this PCS. Right? We still do have it. Many countries have it. Okay? If I can be very straightforward, right? Typically, in countries like Singapore, in Philippines, in India, okay? It's quite, it's still pretty apparent. And I'm not going to sugarcoat here. Now, in getting real, we know that perception bias do happen. Right? Let's not kid ourselves here, because that is the reality. And that's the good thing about being a academic practitioner here. I do not want to go into being, I do not want to delve into being what should be the ideal, right? I rather work on the realities, what's happening, understanding why it's happening, and then, from there synthesizing and say, what can we do to make a change and make things better? And I keep challenging here, and it's part of my, hopefully, a subsequent research that I'm still considering embarking on is looking for a brand of Asian leadership, not to challenge, not necessarily to challenge the Western perspective of leadership. No, it's complementing. I think it's always nice to think about, not having that very that dichotomy, always about the East or the West, right? No, it can be a East and the West, right? A blend where you make it very unique and looking at it from a global perspective. And a lot of things, good stuff actually come out in Asia, because you really look at it in the last 50 years, there is significant growth came up from Asia compared to the rest of the world. And that suggests that we must have been doing something fantastic. We must have been doing something right for ourselves. Okay. So my conclusion for my research is this, right? Really, you have to deal with the perception bias, right? And as I mentioned just now, a lot of my work that I bring it back. In fact, I do bring a lot of my research back into my workplace. Okay, I'm very cognizant and very, very sensitive towards this perception bias, and I will always try to address some of this as early as possible. Now, let's get real again. Okay, we may say that we are seeing there's a bias between against us from the West and all this. Okay? Within Asia itself, amongst us, okay, there are also perception biases, right? We do it to ourselves to a good extent. Although in many instances we don't express it, it's about being implicit here. But of course, there are cases of very explicit perception bias and apparent discrimination as a result. Yeah, right? Often we hear this saying, right? Everyone is a racist, because psychologically we are, because we always distinguish ourselves against anyone, any other person who could be different in different ways. Okay? And that's the whole mental, there's a psyche in human, and that's normal. We have to accept that. Now it's how do we manage ourselves and how do we manage the external world, right? We are not a racist, even though psychologically, mentally, we are all racist. No, the truth is in the practice and the behavior. Do we actually do that? And two is this: I'm always the advocate of an Asian model of success. How we can have a good blend of leadership attributes, right? That showcase that wherever you go, being an Asian, we can be successful, right? Now, lastly, is that for Asian leaders, and that has been my advocacy in my coaching, and even in my, as a board member in some of the companies, I have been driving very hard with the management team to ensure that from top down, the senior management must provide a role model the, that philosophy or that behavior, the self-efficacy, that living up to your own expectation, take ownership, right, in order to move forward. Right? Going beyond technical competence, right? Knowing the rules of the game, because we are in a social world. We do business not just within Asia, we do business with the rest of the world. Right? My business, involvement went all the way to Europe, continue to be with the US, which now we've cut out a lot because of the Trump issue, fortunately. And the majority, of course, still very much in Asia. Right? Now, the self-efficacy, okay, build the mental strength, right? Create a self-esteem, because the moment that the senior management carries that, it propagates down to the rest of the world. Building executive gravitas, I actually developed my own signature intervention. It's called Exactly Smart. That I help the executive of client organizations, my own organizations, for them to be really what I call exactly savvy, right? And have a global mindset for success. Right? Now, lastly, is this. My takeaway is going back to the early slide. For me, there is really a very strong relevance between, or strong association between the real world, okay, and the ideas. So being out there and just practicing and doing is really not good enough for me. Being able to substantiate, and justify why you think, how you behave, right? And being able to explain in very simple terms to whom you want to influence. It's a skill, and it does take knowledge to be able to do that. Because if you do not have, in essence, the knowledge behind, understanding behind, we cannot put into real practice. In fact, we end up even suspecting ourselves. Secondly, is this, it provides me that capacity to be able to continue to challenge myself. Like I mentioned the last earlier, right? I keep asking questions. The curious mind. Now, with the one huge takeaway that I have had from participating in the doctoral program is the rigor of research. There have been a number of research that I've done, and those were primarily field research conducted for real business reasons. I did one in Malaysia talking about the motivational, aspirational level of Malaysia graduates. Now, if anyone from Malaysia in the audience, perhaps validate what I say here. Malaysia has an issue here where, on the average, in the last several years, okay, about 40% of their fresh graduates were not employable or were not employed in the first 6 to 1 year upon graduation. So there were quite a number of unemployment for graduates, fresh graduates, okay? And many of them has resigned to doing home-based businesses, family businesses, and some another kind of wasted their education that they had. Right? So this phenomena was discussed with the government in one of the Malaysian GLC, and I actually conducted this research with 300 companies and about 2,000 graduates, right? And it shows the aspirational level of the graduates in Malaysia. But I wouldn't want to share the results from here. Unfortunately, there was a significant finding that the government need to attend to, and has to do with the cultural influence in Malaysia that has strong repercussions on the motivation of the graduates to work towards financial successes or personal professional successes, after their graduation and as part of their career and professional life. Okay. Their sense of affiliation tends to take precedence, you know, in comparison to the motivation for other forms of success. So, take example, these are some of those researchers that have done earlier talking about career aging population. Now, what this particular doctoral research helped me is, as I went back and reviewed some of those research, my conclusion was, yes, it was done good. I could have done better. So the next time around for me doing another research, I would be more. I feel that I'm even more competent in able to come up with a even more robust, finding. Okay? Now, at the same time, all this helped me to validate many of the questions that I had in my work life. Okay, so I can safely say that I felt that I felt vindicated. Okay, that all these questions, and I wasn't in any way having a false accusation or at least assumption during the time when before I actually had this research done. Okay. Downstream after my research, I've actually used a lot more other research through my readings to develop my own solutions, my interventions. That has been significantly very, very helpful. Okay, and would I stop doing this? I would simply say that, hey, this is the way to go, and I'm enjoying it actually. I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing now. So let me see. Okay, I guess I'm taking up quite a bit of the time down here. Yeah, I should be throwing this particular event to the audience, so that I would rather have an exchange. As much as I have shared, I hope that the content and my sharing has been of some value of the time spent here. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm open to any questions, any thoughts, and any experience to share, especially the experience that you've had. So,
Thank you,
Dr. Knight.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan. Such an insightful session. And I know, the people, the participants, they would have received some more information regarding your personal experience and everything to their DBA. And we have few questions. So I'll not take much of your time.
No, it's okay.
Pointed. I have some of the questions here. So the first one would be do employers value the DBA equally across industries, or is it more relevant in certain sectors?
Generally, based on my experience, they do, right? Not purely from an academic perspective. No, it's actually